It was Sunday afternoon, September 14th, 2025. The skies above Swansea, Wales, shifted into an ominous shade of gray, the kind that locals instinctively knew carried more than just passing rain. The clouds gathered in dense, swollen formations, heavy with the promise of something violent. Within minutes, the heavens opened with a ferocity that was almost unnatural. Sheets of rain hammered down, not in droplets, but in torrents that seemed to blur the line between sky and earth. The sound was deafening, as if the city itself had been plunged beneath a waterfall. What had begun as a typical weekend quickly turned into a nightmare. Streets that just an hour earlier had been filled with the lazy rhythm of Sunday traffic were suddenly swallowed whole by rising waters. Cars that had been parked neatly along the curbs found themselves engulfed. Alarms shrieked through the din as water seeped into their electrical systems, while headlights flickered and died beneath the murky flood. Families, stunned and panicked, abandoned vehicles and waded through waist-deep currents, clutching children and pets, their movements sluggish and desperate against the drag of the water. Firefighters were among the first to brave the chaos. Clad in high-visibility suits, they splashed through torrents with inflatable dinghies in tow, heading for stranded drivers and frightened residents. Social media lit up within minutes. Videos captured the nightmare as it unfolded in real time. A major roundabout was filmed, transformed into what looked like a swirling whirlpool, sucking in cars like toys in a bath. Elsewhere, headlights shone dimly under brown water, eerie beacons of vehicles already submerged. Footage of families crying out from car rooftops and rescue crews pulling people into boats spread across the country in seconds. What should have been a quiet, restful Sunday for Swansea became instead one of the most chaotic and dangerous days the city had experienced in years. For many, it felt less like a storm and more like a fight for their very survival.
Guys, people won't be planned for Sunday.
Okay, have a laugh, take a picture of everyone.
The ferocity of the flooding was what made it so terrifying. Unlike gradual rising tides or a steady build of rainfall that gives people time to react, this storm hit like an ambush. The rain did not politely trickle. It poured with such intensity that in less than an hour, several inches fell across South Wales, overwhelming drains and gutters, saturating roads, and transforming entire neighborhoods into rivers. The Kumbla roundabout on Carm Road became the symbol of the city's helplessness. This crucial artery into Swansea, used daily by thousands, was unrecognizable. Videos revealed cars inching forward, their drivers hoping they could outpace the flood, only to be overtaken within moments. Water rose up their doors, climbed their windshields, and in some cases, swallowed them whole. The headlights glowed faintly from beneath the surface before fading into darkness, leaving behind only the sight of bobbing rooftops and frantic motorists scrambling for safety. Many climbed through windows, desperate and soaked, clutching road signs and railings until firefighters arrived. Swansea had always prided itself on resilience, but the storm reminded everyone just how small a modern city can feel when nature decides to unleash its full power. As the storm pressed on, emergency services coordinated at breakneck speed. Firefighters, police, and paramedics flooded the streets in parallel to the water. On Carmarthen Road, entire families had been stranded in cars that had stalled midstream. Firefighters pushed through currents, hauling children to inflatable dinghies. Parents stumbled behind, clutching bags that now seemed laughably inadequate against the scale of their loss. From second-story windows across neighborhoods like Kill, Manelton, and Schwammerla, residents leaned out with cameras and terrified eyes, watching as streets disappeared beneath torrents of brown water. The sound of emergency sirens carried across districts, echoing against buildings as responders raced to each new crisis. Police quickly sealed off main intersections, diverting traffic away from deadly pockets of water. But for many, it was already too late. Vehicles were stranded by the dozen. Ambulance teams set up staging areas on the highest patches of dry land they could find, treating the injured, comforting the traumatized, and passing out thermal blankets to those pulled shivering from the flood. The surreal sight of firefighters paddling dinghies through streets that just hours earlier had bustled with weekend shoppers left residents shaken. It felt like a disaster film, except the fear was real, the destruction personal. This was not only a Swansea ordeal, it was part of a sprawling weather system that had stretched itself across much of the United Kingdom. The storm, dubbed Storm Amy, carved its path with merciless scale. Nearly 600 miles wide, it lashed cities from Cardiff to Newcastle, Glasgow to Birmingham. The Met Office recorded winds gusting at nearly 70 miles per hour, strong enough to snap branches, scatter bins through streets, and bring down power lines already under strain. Rainfall came in bursts so heavy it seemed biblical. In England, half an inch of rain fell in single hours across regions, while in Scotland, bursts exceeded 3/4 of an inch in the same span. No drainage system could keep pace with such intensity. The ground, already sodden from weeks of steady rain, had become a sponge that could take no more. It was a perfect recipe for disaster. The ripple effects spread far. Major highways like the M4 near Swansea slowed into crawling rivers of metal and stranded people. Drivers abandoned their cars and trudged through water that lapped at their knees. Across the country, airlines issued mass delays, ferries canceled crossings, and railway services faced widespread interruptions. Crews scrambled to clear debris from tracks and overhead lines while passengers sat stranded in stations, bewildered by the sudden paralysis. Even airports in Bristol, Manchester, and Belfast felt the chaos, with delays stretching into hours. Travelers described the uneasy silence of departure halls, punctured only by storm updates and weather warnings crackling through loudspeakers. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a reminder of how fragile the infrastructure of a modern nation becomes when nature pushes too far. For Swansea residents caught in the eye of the storm, the ordeal took on a much more intimate terror. Families watched helplessly as water crept up driveways and rushed into basements. Homes that had stood for decades without incident suddenly found themselves under siege. Cars parked neatly along residential streets were swallowed. At the Corla roundabout, where water surged to its highest, parents clutched children above their heads as they waded waist-deep to safety. Dogs were lifted into dinghies alongside their owners. Fire crews recorded more than a dozen calls within a single hour. Elderly residents, unable to escape flooded homes, had to be rescued through upstairs windows. Businesses closed suddenly, their shelves ruined and merchandise floating in filthy water within minutes of the first surge. A shopkeeper in Manelton described the despair of watching an entire season's stock wash away, while another resident recalled sitting in darkness, powerless as floodwaters lapped at the door and the sound of rushing torrents filled the night. Social media played its dual role of witness and amplifier. Videos of cars bobbing like toys, families crying as they evacuated, and firefighters battling currents spread far and fast. The emotional toll rippled beyond the city itself. Anxiety seeped into communities already on edge from storms in previous weeks. Parents refused to let children out to play. Runners participating in the Swansea Bay 10K found themselves drenched and shaken mid-course, and thousands wondered aloud whether this was only the beginning of something worse. If one afternoon could bring so much havoc, what would the next storm deliver? As night approached and the rain began to ease, the scale of destruction became clearer. Streets once filled with honking horns and weekend chatter were left smothered in layers of mud and debris. Vehicles sat abandoned like shipwrecks, their interiors destroyed, their owners staring in disbelief. Inside homes, waterlogged possessions were dragged to the curb, furniture sagging, carpets ruined, children's toys covered in filth. Emergency crews worked through the dark hours, pumping water from neighborhoods, unblocking drains, and towing wrecks from intersections. Swansea Council issued warnings that repairs could take weeks, and some routes might remain closed indefinitely. The soundscape of the city changed. Where once there had been sirens and rain, now there was the constant drone of generators, the mechanical churn of pumps, and the low murmur of neighbors sharing disbelief in hushed voices. Yet within the devastation, resilience revealed itself. Volunteers poured into the hardest-hit neighborhoods with bottled water, hot meals, and blankets. Community halls opened as shelters. Strangers offered their dry homes to displaced families. There was no mistaking the fear or the loss, but there was also solidarity, the undeniable instinct of people to stand together when disaster strikes. It was, as many said later, the one light in a day otherwise defined by darkness. Authorities urged continued vigilance. The storm had passed, but forecasts warned of unsettled weather in the days ahead. The danger of saturated ground, swollen rivers, and blocked drains meant Swansea's battle was not over. For many, the storm was more than just a natural disaster. It was a warning, a vivid reminder of how fragile life is when nature decides to unleash itself. And while this storm belonged to Wales, the message carried further. It echoed across countries where cities pride themselves on readiness, but rarely experience such scale. The question lingered: if this could paralyze Swansea in hours, what might it do elsewhere? Swansea now stands as a sobering example of how quickly lives can be overturned. Homes were lost, vehicles destroyed, and neighborhoods submerged. But alongside the ruin were stories of courage, of neighbors rescuing each other, of strangers giving shelter, of emergency workers who risked their lives to pull people from rising waters. The memory of this storm will not fade soon, and neither will the question it left behind. How prepared are we truly for the next wave of extreme weather? The storm may have ended, but its warning remains. If you found this video informative, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with others. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest updates on major events around the world. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.